Let's continue building our 3D avatar creator. In this second part, we will focus on storing, fetching and displaying assets from a database. As we don't want to change the code every time we will want to add assets and to let non-developers being able to have control, we need a user interface to add new items into our database. Instead of setting up a database, a backend, writing SQL queries and handling file uploads, we will leverage PocketBase, a free open source backend as a service solution. You can have a preview of what it is and how we are able, through code, to contact our instance. When working locally, you can download the installer from the documentation. And for production purpose and for my use case to be able to have it online so you can try it, I will continue to use Elestio, the kind sponsor of this video series. On your Elestio dashboard, open your service, which will contain all your CI/CD pipelines. And on the top right, you will see Deploy a new pipeline button, which shows GitHub before for hosting our project. This time, we will use Docker Compose to use ready-to-use software. Let's type PocketBase, click on it, and select. Because we already have a VM, we can choose Deploy on an existing VM. If you have multiple, be sure it's the right one. And on the right, you can see it doesn't affect the price because it doesn't create a new server. It's on the same. Then hit next. You can fine tune the Docker Compose configuration, add environment variables, but we don't need to touch at it. We can just hit create CI/CD pipeline. It will take a few seconds to build and deploy your PocketBase instance. And once it's done, you will need to click on show for PocketBase admin. Then you will have the URL to access the administration panel. First, click here to copy the password to your clipboard and open the URL. Type your email address and paste the password from your clipboard, then log in. You arrive on your PocketBase instance. What you can see, here we are in collections and you have the list of collections on the left. You have one by default, which is users. It is here if you use authentication services from PocketBase. We will skip this part in this video, but if you want to add authentication, login, you can definitely use it. For the moment, we will create two collections. One will be the groups, which will be what parts we can modify. For example, the head, the hair, the top, bottom, etc. And the second collection will be the assets we put into those categories. Let's go. We hit new collection. This is the name of your collection. Let's name it customization groups. Automatically, it will create a unique ID, a created date, and an updated. So when you do a change, it will update the updated date. For each group, we will need a name, a position, so it will be a number, so we can order them. And I think we will add the other ones later. So now we can hit create and create the second collection, customization assets. The first thing we will need is to add a relation to the group it belongs to. Let's name it group. We select the collection which is related to this one. So for us, it's customization groups. And we want the relation to be single because one asset is only linked to one group. Then we can add a name to the asset. This way it will be easier for you to manage them. We also want to display a thumbnail, a preview of the asset. For this, we will be using an image, a file. Let's name it a thumbnail. And again, we have the choice between one file, one image, or multiple one, but we will keep it to single. And then another file, which is the GLB file, the 3D model we will be using. Let's name it URL. Again, only one. And that should be good. We can create it. By the way, create is here on the bottom right behind my head. We will add other columns later, maybe other collection, but for now, it's good. Let's just fill it a bit. Let's add a few customization groups. We'll have the head. We can set the position to 1. It will be the first one. Then the hair, position 2. Here, I will add them one by one and I know what I will enter. So the position will be linear. But if you want later to add another category between, the position will be very useful. And let me speedrun the other ones. Okay, so we have a nice list of customization groups from the head to glasses, to shoe accessories. Currently, they are all at the same level. So maybe later we will split head and body or cloth part. But for now, I don't know yet, so we'll do it later if we ever do. And now let's add a few assets. Go to customization assets, new record, and now we have the picker. So we need to select to which group we add it to. So for now, we'll just add a few top example. Go to top, selection, then the name, let's name it top 01. We add a thumbnail because we will create our thumbnail later with a nice process. For now, we will just use some samples from Decentraland. I downloaded a few, thumbnail, downloads, and thumbnail 1. Okay, open. URL, it will be the GLB file, but we won't do it right now. So create. We do it again. Name top 02. Don't forget to add the group. So top, add the thumbnail, and go. And the last one, top 3. Attach the group. You can even search here, so it can be easier than if you have a lot in your list than just scrolling and searching for it. Top, set selection, add the thumbnail, open, and create. Fine, it should be good for the moment. We'll come to it later, adding more columns, adding the assets with the GLB file. But for now, it's good to start fetching assets. The last thing before diving into our code is if you go to settings and you have, for example, file storage, currently it's hosting the content on PocketBase, but if for some reason, maybe space reason, you want to host it elsewhere, you can use S3 storage. S3 is the AWS one, but you have a lot of providers that are free, that are S3 compatible, for example, Cloudflare, and you also have Minayo. But it was just for information purpose, and I think I will be using this for this series. Then, if you want to give access to other people, if you don't want to work alone on this project, or if you have a 3D designer that will help you do the assets, you can invite them into the admin section. New admin, you invite them with the email, create them a password, and then they will be able to do like what you did. Before fetching our assets from PocketBase, we need to have a global store, a global state management to have access to the categories and the data from our backend. We will be using Zustand, so let's install the library. In the terminal, run yarn add Zustand. Once it's done, yarn dev and hide the terminal. Then let's create our store. In source, we can create a file we name store.js. You have the example on how to create a store in the documentation. Let's copy it and paste it. So currently it's named use bear store. We will name it use configurator store. So everywhere in our project we'll be able to use that hook. Then we have a simple example showing us how to have data and methods to impact our data. For now, we'll want to have categories, which are the customization groups, and the current category we are on. By default, let's set it to null. And we also want the assets that are currently loaded from one category. So assets is an array. We can get rid of the toExample method and create a first method named fetch categories. It will be an async method because we need to call our backend. Let's see on PocketBase how we fetch data from it. Let's start by the groups. On the top right, you have API preview. And here you have examples on how to use the API. Either list search, this is what we will need to get all the data. But you also have view, create, update, delete to have a real backend at your disposal. Go to list search. And it starts by import PocketBase and using the URL for PocketBase. Copy it and paste it on the top of your file. But we didn't install PocketBase. So first, let's open the terminal, yarn add, and add it. Fine, yarn dev again. And currently, it is using my URL hard-coded here. But instead, we'll be using an environment variable. This way, I won't be using the same locally that I'm using when I deploy my project. We are using Vite with React. To create environment variable, we simply need to create a .env.local file and also to prefix our keys with Vite underscore. Let's do it. We copy the URL, of course take yours, and maybe if you are using the local one, it won't be a URL address but localhost. Then create new file, .env.local, enter, put it on the root of the folder. So here it is, create file, accept the use of a dot. So if you look, it's here after the source folder. Vite underscore PocketBase underscore URL is equal to, and paste your URL. Hit save, and we can now create our PocketBase URL. It will be equal to Vite PocketBase URL. And if we don't have one, we will throw an error in the console. So you will be able to easily know what is the problem. And then new PocketBase with the URL variable loaded from the environment. Don't forget, if you decided to use Elestio to host your project, go to the deployment of the React app, then build and deploy. Don't change anything except inside environment variables. Here you can add your PocketBase URL. I can simply copy what I have here and paste it here. Then apply changes and continue. Now our PocketBase settings should be good. We can go into fetch categories and code the logic. We have a few code examples here. Of course, you can check the JavaScript SDK documentation if you need to go further. But for our use case, it's pretty simple. We just need this one. So we have a sort example with minus created. If you look at sort, it's using minus or plus to decide if you are in a descending or ascending ordering. Let's take it. Let's name it const categories is equal to this. But instead of sorting it by created, we'll be using plus because we want an ascending order, and position. Then we do the same for the assets. We want all the assets, customization, assets, and sort by minus created. Of course, you could also add a position column on the assets. Now to update our store easily, we have access to a set method. We call it and we add the updated variables. So categories, this is the one we have here. Then current category, we set it to categories of 0. So the first categories will be the current one we are on by default. And then all the assets. Let's also prepare another method, set current category, to be able to switch between the different categories. So it will take a category as a parameter, and it will simply update it. And to have access to our store outside this file, we need to export use configurator store. So now, to be able to use it and to see that it is working or not, we will create a new component. To organize a bit our code, let's add a new folder, name it components, and let's create UI.jsx. This is where we'll put our user interface. Let's do it. Export const UI is equal to, and we will return our UI. We will have a main container containing everything that is fixed on top of the screen. Then we'll add a full screen container that will be using Flex to be able to space things. So we'll have one big container on top and one on the bottom containing our assets and our group. On the top, we'll be using Justify Between to have my logo, but you can use your logo, of course, on the top left, and a download button component on the top right. So when we have it ready, we'll be able to download the GLB file. Then we have another container that will be pushed between because of the Justify Between, and it will contain the assets box. Let's start with the download button. It will simply be a button, so do the UI that you like with a download. Later, we'll add the logic to trigger the download. Now we can create our asset box. Inside, the first thing we need to do is to use our new store, use configurator store. And inside, we have access to many things: categories, the current category, fetch categories, and set current category. Then, in a use effect, because the first time we load it, we want to fetch the categories from our backend. So we do it. Then we can render our UI. It's a rounded box on the bottom, but maybe we will change the UI later. For now, we focus on the functional. Then in a flex container, we'll put all the categories name. So we loop through all our categories, and for each of them, we add a button. So we add the key is category ID. We know it's unique, so it's perfect. Then on click, we will set current category with the category we are currently on. So it's the full object, not only the name. And then for the styling of our button, we add if it's our current category, we can change the color of it. If it's not, we have a gray color. And then for the content of the button, we add the category name. Don't forget to do all the required imports. Use configuration store, use effect, and it should be fine. Just before checking if it works or not, a quick explanation about how I am using currently use configurator store. By using it like this and getting any variables I want, it will re-render the component every time anything changes in use configurator store. In general, you don't want to do this, but in this case, because we are fetching almost everything from our state, it's good. But later on the project on isolated components, you will do the same that this example from the documentation. You will do use bear store, and from the state, you will get only the variables you expect an update from. And only if bears is updated, it will re-render that component. So keep that in mind. Now to be able to check if it works, on our app, next to the Canva, we'll add the UI component. We reload and we have a few errors. First, my logo is not here. I will add it. New folder, images, and I drag and drop my logo here. But of course, it's not the biggest problem. We have an error because we are not allowed to fetch the data from the backend. And actually, this is good that we are not allowed because we didn't allow people to fetch data from our backend. But in our case, the data is not critical and we want anyone to have access to those data without the need to log in or anything. To be able to change it, click here on the cog, edit collection, and you have API rules. And you can see that currently admins only are able to do things on our database. The only one we will need to unlock is list search rule. We click here and leave empty to grant everyone access. So we just do it, save. It closed everything, but let's open again. And you can see that the others are admin only and I have a button to unlock it. But this one, it's not admin only. So it's empty, so everyone has access to it. And I have a button to set admin only. So now it's in the good state. We need to do the same on the assets. API rules, unlock it. But you can see it's powerful. You could make more specific rules if you are using the authentication, authorization system. Save changes. And let's try it again. We can reload. And now we have all our groups that are displayed here. If I click on one, we don't see the updates. So maybe something is wrong with the set current category. And I think, I said it's the whole object. So it's maybe current category.name. And it's way better. No worries about the UI and the non-responsive. We'll fix it later. You can also see that we have an error in the console, which is that the request was auto-cancelled. This is because we are in development mode and in strict mode. So the use effect is called twice, but no worries, on the deployed version, it won't happen, so you can just ignore. Okay, currently we are displaying the groups. Now we want to display the assets in the group. To display all the assets from one category, we display them in the assets box below here. But first, we need to have access to all those data. We could just look at the assets and do the filter in our component. But the most convenient way is to store the asset categories inside each category. So we loop through each category, and then inside each category, we add an assets array, which will be all the assets filtered based on if the asset group is equal to the ID of our current category. That way, it's only processed once at the loading of our application. Of course, you would use a different approach if you were using paging or if you are loading the assets only when you click on a category. But here, because we don't have thousands of items, it's a good approach to load everything. Now below our categories, we can add a flex container for all our assets. So we loop inside our category through the assets. Then for each asset, we will add a button. But then inside the button, we want to add the image that we have in the thumbnail column. So if we try to do image and set the source to asset.thumbnail, we'll have a funny surprise. Let's try it. We reload. We go to the top section and all paths are broken. If we check with the inspector, we go on the image and you can see that we have only the end of the path. So it's trying to load my thumbnail locally. This is because with PocketBase, you can have a few options to be able to adjust your thumbnail, adjust your images with URL parameters. So what you need to do is to use the SDK and use getURL. So that way you can use other parameters, but at least it will create the full URL for you. To be able to use PocketBase everywhere, let's export it from our store. And in the UI here for the source, it will be pb for pocketbase.files.getURL, and you pass asset in the full object and asset.thumbnail. So it's the column that contains our image. And we don't use extra parameter for now. Don't forget to do the imports and save. Let's try it. So now all our categories are empty except top that contain our lovely preview of parts that we will later be able to visualize in 3D. Thank you for watching. In the next video, we'll finally start the most important part, assembling our 3D assets into the armature to create our custom character. To continue the journey with me and build your own 3D avatar configurator, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when the next part is released. See you in the next video.